Great. So again, thank you everybody for your patience. Sorry for the delay. I'm Dan Scheinman, the Bird Conservation Director for Audubon, Arkansas. Just a couple of administrative things before we get going. This is a Q&A, so this is for your questions to be answered by our expert today. I do have some questions prepared, but really we want to hear from you. So if you are on Zoom, you can type your questions into the chat box because everybody's on mute, cut down on background noise. And if you're watching this on Facebook, then you can type your questions into the comment box, and those will be relayed to me to relay to our guest. Also, this is scheduled for 30 minutes. Obviously, we got a late start, and if the comments and questions are coming in, this will go longer than that. So don't worry about the time right now. So without further delay, let me introduce our guest tonight. That's Tana Beasley, who is Arkansas Game and Fish Commission's Facility Manager for the Potlatch Conservation Education Center at Cooks Lake, which is near Casscoe in eastern Arkansas. Tana is originally from Lubbock, Texas. After graduating from Harding University, she taught biology and applied biology in public schools before becoming an educator with Game and Fish. She is the only federally permitted master hummingbird bander in the state. She began banding hummingbirds in 2008 and bands at least 300 birds a year. So I'm going to get things kicked off with actually a personal question, Tana, and that what motivated you to become the state's master hummingbird bander?
Well, we are blessed there at Cooks Lake in that we are in a natural flyway. So we've always had lots of hummingbirds. And we kept wondering, some of the things that we wondered about was, do you have the same bird that comes back to you? How do you know? They all look alike. We were wondering, well, what about does your bird stay with you all year, during the summertime? Or when does it start to leave? Or how old is it? You can't pull a tooth and count the rings. So we did some research to see some of the things that we could perhaps find out. We also helped contribute to the study on the migratory habits of the hummingbirds. And that just sort of gave us a jumping point. When you apply for a permit, you have to have a reason. And your reason is not just because it's like fun, which it is, but that you don't write that down. You're looking for information either to prove something or perhaps give information that would help someone else prove something. So that's really how we got started. We were very blessed in that we had the credentials to go ahead and be trained and in 2008. Of course, 2009 was our first full year of banding, and it just escalated from there. They're wonderful little birds. They have a lot of knowledge in that little teeny tiny head, and we just wondered, how did it get there?
Well, I'm so glad that you are our hummingbird bander and you went through that.
Thank you.
Because it's a big benefit for us, as I'm sure we'll get into in a bit. But first question from the audience is, how do you catch a hummingbird and band them?
Okay. Think of and I can't talk without hands. Think of a large bird cage with a big door on one side. You raise the door and put a feeder, we use a small feeder, up and you hang it on the inside of your cage. The birds go to that, they feed, and typically once they feed, they go up. So that puts them up in the top of the cage and you can reach in and get hold of them. And if you ever have to move a hummingbird, sometimes you may have to get one that's caught in your house or garage or whatever. Please remember to be very, very careful. And I don't know if you can see me do this. Say, this is the hummingbird's body. Just slide your fingers over them like that. You want to be sure that you're not pressing on the breastplate, because that can very easily push that into their heart. So just slide your fingers over them like that. You'll contain the wings. When you contain the wings, it's like, okay, pick me up and do whatever and let me go right quick. And then as soon as you can get them outside, you know, try to get them to a feeder, let them get a drink, and they're gone.
What's the most interesting hummingbird you've ever banded, and where was it?
Oh, wow. Well, primary banding has been at Cooks Lake. I did band at Mount Magazine at the Butterfly Festival for 2 or 3 years. And of course, that was exciting because we got hummingbirds coming back to us that we had banded there before. And oh gee, most exciting. I think one of the most fulfilling things, we had a hummingbird brought to the Nature Center at Pine Bluff. All it could do was fly in circles. It couldn't do anything else. And so Eric Maynard was the director over there at the time, and so he brought it to me and he said, "See if you can fix this bird." And so I looked at it and I couldn't tell that there was anything wrong with it, except its body was shaped kind of funny. And I got the feeling of its little feathers on the back side, and I thought, I think I know what you did. So I gave it a bath. It had gotten into the nectar, and then wherever it sat, its little tail feathers were at an angle, and they dried that way. So when I got the dried sugar water out of them, his little tail was straight, and he was able to fly off. So that was an easy fix.
So its rudder was bent out of shape.
Its rudder was bent out of shape, yes. Yep. I love fixes like that, yeah.
Well, besides that one, if you do capture a hummingbird that is underweight or injured, do you take it to a rehabilitator?
Not usually. Usually I try to go ahead and work with it myself. At the center, we'll try to get hold of some protein mixed in with, and I'm not sure if that's the right protein because I'm just assuming that they use some of the protein that we do. But we have had, in the past, we always have some birds that are brought to us like that. And, you know, you get attached to them. And when someone calls and asks, you know, what can they do for their bird? First thing I tell them was, now remember, there's internal injuries that we cannot see. And don't get too attached to them in case they don't make it. And a lot of times they don't make it because they do have internal injuries. So it's very, very difficult to rehab a tiny little bird like that. It would only be maybe if they were, as you say, underweight, underfed or something. What did I do?
Right.
Dan?
Yeah, you're good.
I don't see you anymore.
We can see you.
Okay. I touched something somewhere, I guess.
So how big are the bands that you put on hummingbirds?
The bands are 5.6 millimeters long. They're extremely tiny, tiny, tiny. As far as the weight impeding the flight of a bird, theoretically you can mail 5,500 bands with the first class stamp.
Wow.
Like before I form them into a circle, you just dump 5,500 into an envelope and seal it. It'll go with the first class stamp.
Right. Because unlike songbird bands and bigger bird bands, in one flat sheet instead of being already rolled up, and you've got to roll them because they're just so tiny.
Right. Yes, when I get them, there's 400 bands on a sheet, large sheet, and I have a special machine that I cut them with. It's a very, very precise machine. And then I have to form them and be sure that I get the letters on the outside, not the inside. And I can store 100 bands on a clip that looks much like a large safety pin. And then, of course, when you take them off of that, we have to, you know, open them up again. And I use a tapestry needle to spread the little band open. So I can and I have a special pair of pliers that I can put the band in. There's just enough pressure on the band that it will hold it in place, but it won't squeeze it shut. And I just slide that over the right leg, a band on the right leg, and slide that little that little pair of pliers with its little band over the leg and just real quickly squeeze it, and then it's already done.
What other data do you collect while you have the hummingbird in your hand?
We do the measurements, the Coleman measurement, the wing.
Coleman is the bill.
The wing measurements. These can be very, very, well, we really need them sometimes if we can't determine if it's a male or female. If it's a fledgling, sometimes it's a little more difficult that way. So the measurements are what we go by. Now, when a hummingbird leaves the nest, it's called a fledgling. Fledglings are full grown. Baby hummingbirds do not fly. They sit in the nest, they eat, they poop, and they work those pectoral muscles like for their wings. But once they leave that nest, we can put a band on them. We can put a band on the fledgling. And I mean, it's not like putting a bracelet on a baby. We don't have to take the band off later on because that little bird is the same. He's an adult, she is an adult size when they leave the nest. So that way, that's the only way we can truly age a bird. If we put a band on it as a fledgling and I get to check it the next year, I know it is 1 year old. If I band an adult bird and check it the next year, all I can say is I checked that bird a year ago. I have no idea how old. You know, it could be 1 year old, it could be 10 years old.
Sure. That's why the banders use the term hatch year and after hatch year, and that's
Right.
as good as you can get it for a bird. It's 1 year
Right.
or it's more than one.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
But what is the oldest hummingbird you've recaptured?
We've had, I think maybe 2 birds that came back that we aged at 10 years old. They're coming back to us at 10 years old. And we do get the same birds that come back to us. Those of you that put feeders up religiously, if you are late putting your feeder up, when your bird comes back, they're going to circle where that feeder's supposed to be, and literally, then they come to the window and it's like they look in there like, hey, get up off your end and get my feeder out here. I'm hungry and I'm here. You know, how else would they know there's supposed to be a feeder there if they had never been there?
But what else have you learned from seeing the same hummingbirds return year after year?
Well, of course, those of you that watch your hummingbirds real closely, you notice certain characteristics, certain actions that they make. It seems like we kind of put a personality to some of them. Try not to get too involved with them in case they don't come back. And but mainly they're just zizzing back and forth, and I don't really, it's not like I can sit, well, at the office, which I haven't been at in a long time, my desk is set so that I do not face the window. Because if I did, I'd sit there and watch the hummingbirds all day long. And that would not be good. So I just have to kind of keep my back to them and only watch them when I have time like that.
The birds as a distraction? No.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. They're very interesting. Anybody that watches them, you know that they have their own little personalities. And of course, there's always the boss hog, so to speak, the one that wants to be sure that he defends his feeding source. And I've only met one person that did not like hummingbirds. And the reason he gave me was that they fought. And so I said, well, let's think about this a minute. Think about all the animals in the world, maybe sometimes even humans. At some point or other, they may be forced to fight for their food source. And that's all the hummingbird is doing. And when I explained it like that, he says, oh, okay. And would you believe he was selling hummingbird feeders?
Well,
changed his mind a little bit.
so when we put out lots of feeders and the birds are competing for those feeders and there's lots of sugar water for everybody, why are the birds still fighting? Why are they bothering to fight when there's plenty of food around for them?
It's just it's a self-preservation thing. If you have pets in the house, and I have 4 little rescue dogs, and I know 2 of them had very, very, well, they all had pretty rough beginnings, but one of them in particular, and she will still be guarding. I mean, she's full, but if there's still something left in her nest, in her bowl, she'll defend that bowl against the others, like, you know, like that's the last bit of food she'll ever see. It's something that's ingrained into them like that.
So speaking of feeding hummingbirds, one of our viewers wants to know if there is a safe red dye to use in hummingbirds.
No. They don't need any of the dyes. Usually dye number 40 is what some of the commercial companies put in it. And when a hummingbird takes in sugar water that has red dye in it, and we can trace them, put a tracer in it so we'll know what it is, you know, where it's located in the body. Within 15 minutes after taking in that sugar water, that little hummingbird has metabolized that sugar and is using that energy. At the same time, if they took in the red dye, it may be up to 3 days before they expel that red dye. So they don't need it. You're using probably a red feeder. Of course, they love red. Anything red in your yard will potentially help them see your yard. Just like other birds, they hunt their food by sight. They don't smell anything. And if they're flying low, and most of the time they do fly low because they are looking for red flowers or the flowers that are in that end of the spectrum. And actually, we believe that they see like what's called a beyond violet color. This is a wavelength that we don't see, but they can detect it. It makes the flowers that they're looking for stand out against the brown ground or the green grass or leaves or trees or whatever, wherever the flowers are. So it helps them to see these, anything that's red like that. And it's believed that they can see this beyond violet as far as 1/4 to 3/4 of a mile away. They can detect that. So it helps them tremendously. It also will help them, the nectar in their favorite flowers apparently has something to do with the wavelength that's given off by that flower. So that a hummingbird, if it has emptied the nectar, it will fly right by that flower, but it won't stop there because there's nothing, it knows, it can tell that there's no nectar there yet. But the flowers, it may fly by there again, and yeah, it's got nectar to go to it.
And really all across the Western Hemisphere where there are hummingbirds, they feed on flowers of all sorts of colors. And it's really just about associating the nectar reward with that flower. So it almost doesn't matter what color your feeders are, as long as they learn to associate that feeder in that location with nectar, they will come to it when they discover it.
Right. And they're very curious. So if somebody gives you a real fancy, pretty feeder, and I've had people ask about this, but they'll say, but it's not red. It doesn't have any red on it. I'm afraid to use it. And I said, hey, hummingbirds are very inquisitive. They'll see that thing and they'll wonder what's there. And they'll check it out. Yeah.
Sure. I saw a photo on the Arkansas Hummingbirds Facebook page recently of a hummingbird that got its bill caught in a little hole in the side of the house. So clearly it was checking out that hole in the siding for nectar. So that does provide evidence for what you're saying.
Yes. Well, now it may have been thinking that there were some tiny insects there, because hummingbirds cannot live by nectar alone. They must have protein, just like we need to have protein. So they get their protein from tiny, tiny insects. tiny spiders, sometimes even little pieces of the pollen. So that, and they can exist just on insects. Like if it's wintertime or something and you still have a hummingbird that's hanging around, like a rufous hummingbird, they are looking for insects like that. However,
Rufous hummingbird.
they do not, hummingbirds do not like ants. There's too much acid, so they do not eat ants if ants get on the feeder.
And of course, the adult hummingbirds feed their young insects and only insects and not nectar. So if you really
well,
gotta have insects around for them.
right. The adults, while the mother's the one that's going to be taking care of the babies. And so she's going to get insects and nectar. She'll swallow, get all that swallowed and partially digested. And then she will poke her little beak down into the little baby's gullet. And it looks like she's poking it down to their little toenails. And she will, her body will pump and so that she regurgitates that partially digested nectar bug solution.
Yum.
Yum. That's why
Yeah.
I don't want to have, I wouldn't want to have to, if we had a young one that somebody brought me to take care of, you know, I could drink nectar, okay, but I don't know about eating the bugs. I don't think I could do that. So
We have many questions from our viewers, so let's
okay.
we're moving here.
Okay.
What is the best feeding formula, and should people buy premixes? And is there a difference between summer feeding and winter feeding?
Okay. Hummingbirds like a certain type of sugar, and we find that particular type of sugar in just plain table sugar, what you eat, what you have sitting on the table in there. You don't want to use any other types of sugar or brown sugar or anything like that. Your formula for mixing your sugar, if you'll look at your hand, you'll remember the formula. 1 part sugar, 4 parts water. You can use tap water, that's fine. Most cities, most of the time, there's not that many chemicals in your tap water. If you're concerned about like the chlorine that the city uses to backwash the filters, you can just draw the water, let it sit there for a few minutes, and chlorine dissipates real quickly. So it would be okay to use then. As far as heating the water, primary thing that does, it makes your sugar melt faster. Some people think that it makes the sugar water stay better longer. At Cooks Lake, we don't have that problem because the sugar water doesn't stay around long enough. I do have a dedicated refrigerator, and for the nectar that we mix up, and we mix it in a big 5-gallon, the little water thing that you take to the ball field, has a little spigot at the bottom. And so that's primarily what's in that big refrigerator like that. What was the rest question?
Should you change that sugar to water ratio in the winter versus summer?
No. Okay. The 1-to-4 ratio makes the sugar water that we make a certain viscosity or thickness. This is the same viscosity that is found in the flowers. It's the same sugar content that's found in the hummingbird's favorite flowers. So that's why they go to certain flowers. Butterflies primarily go to a different color of a flower because it has a different sugar content. I mean, they will go to the same thing, but typically butterflies are looking for something, a different color like that. So if you increase the sugar content, and we have this thing about, we think, well, if we put more sugar in there, like in the wintertime, they're going to get more energy. It would be like someone making you a real thick malt. They're going to increase the thickness or the viscosity, and they're going to give you a tiny little straw. Now we're going to sit there and work on that malt until we can finally get something out of it. But the little hummingbird, most of the time they don't land to eat. A flower won't support their weight. So most hummingbirds, when they're eating, if they're not at a feeder, when they're eating at just a normal flower, they haven't landed anywhere. There's nothing for them to land on. So they're using that flight energy, trying to work hard to get that real thick nectar out. So no, you need to just stay with your 1-to-4 ratio all the time. As far as purchasing store-bought, the sugar, it almost looks like somebody took the sugar and ground it up, so it probably dissolves more quickly. You already have the sugar on your table, so why not just use what you have? They like that very well.
That's right. So just white table sugar and water is all you need all
Yep.
year. But how often must you change your feeder?
On really hot days, if your feeder is catching a lot of sun, I would be really watching it maybe by the end of the second day if you haven't had a lot of birds on it. By the 4th or 5th day, definitely. If your water starts to get sort of a little bit of a cloudiness, see, normally it's going to be clear when you put it out like that. So if it starts to get a little bit cloudy, dump it. Dump it, because your sugar, it will start to ferment and it'll sour, and the hummingbird won't go to it. Also, if you have ants that get in the sugar water, they're going to give off an acid, and your hummingbirds won't touch that water either. You don't want the ants in there anyway.
Well, how do you keep ants off the hummingbird feeder?
2 things. You can get, or you can make a water guard. This would be a little cup. You can make one out of the top of a spray can lid, poke a little hole right in the bottom of the spray can lid, and put well, we can use a coat hanger, clip the ends on the coat hanger. That's a good strong wire. Stick that through the little hole that you poked, and then seal around that with a glue gun, hot glue gun. So, because that's where you're going to put your water reservoir. Take your wire and crimp it on each end. So you'll hang that where you hung your feeder, and then put the feeder on the bottom of your little wire there, and fill that thing with water. A lot of the hummingbird feeders, if you look at the top of them, there's a little indented reservoir. That's for water. Ants don't like water, so they don't go across it typically. Or if you're just hanging your feeder and you don't want to have to mess with using a water guard, loop you hang with a real fine fishing line. Ants can't climb on a fishing line. But please do not put like on your pole, if you're using a bishop pole, don't put like Casscoe or oils like that on there. I mean, yeah, that'll kind of keep the ants from going up it for a while, but if the hummingbird, when they're preening, just like other birds, if they get some of that petroleum-based oil on their feathers, it can impede their flight. So it's best that you not use anything like that on your pole. Just use a fish if you don't have anything else.
And folks, that goes for all of your bird feeders too. You're trying to keep squirrels off, raccoons off, whatever. Do not put Vaseline, oil, anything like that on the poles, because not only will you harm the animals you're trying to keep off, you'll also lose any bird that comes in contact with that stuff.
Yeah.
So baffles and ant motes are the way to deal with the pests you don't want in your feeders.
And you can purchase, and you can purchase at a lot of the stores where they sell feeders. You can purchase a little chemical ant guard, or like I say, you can make one out of something that you usually throw away. Yeah. Or use a fishing line on there.
So someone wants to know which is better for hummingbird feeder, plastic or glass?
Doesn't matter. Either way. A glass, if it's a clear glass and you have your clear liquid in there, if it's hung where there's a little bit of sunlight hitting it, it'll come nearer sparkling, and that will also help catch the eye of the hummingbird. we just use the plain old feeders that we get at Walmart. Then when we clean them, we use a solution of 1/4 cup of Clorox to a gallon of water. You can, and we have enough feeders, we can just switch the feeders out, but you can just put your dirty your dirty,
Your feeders.
feeder, thank you. It's been a long day. Your little feeder in that, let it soak overnight, and then you can either just use a soft brush and everything just brushes right off of it. The little sooty stuff that gets in the little places where the hummingbird eats, that is kind of the same thing, the same reason that we don't want somebody to go to the milk to your refrigerator and get the milk carton out and drink out of it and then set it back in the refrigerator. We frown on that, but that's what the hummingbirds do. If there's anything, you know, they're sticking their little beaks in one, and then they go up to another one and another one, and they don't bother to wash their beaks or their feet. They don't have hands, so.
Sure. So the birds are spreading germs, so that's why you want to clean your feeders out. And let's reemphasize that point. Every single time you take your feeder down to clean it, you have to wash it out, whether it's with a weak bleach solution or vinegar or just soap and water. You got to clean it out. You can't just dump it out and put new nectar in. It has to be clean before you put fresh nectar in there every single time.
And now remember, if you're using the Clorox, even though when you take it out and rinse it off, you may still be smelling, if you have a real good sensitive nose, which I don't, but anyway, you may still be smelling the Clorox, you think. It doesn't matter, I mean, it's going to dissipate quickly anyway, but it doesn't matter to the birds. They don't smell it. They don't smell Clorox.
Personally, I don't use Clorox because I think it's toxic, but I prefer vinegar if anything. But we have many other questions. Let me move on here just a second. Somehow someone has gotten off of mute. Okay. So Tana, let's see. Another question is, will a hummingbird come to a feeder that is at a higher elevation, like a second or third floor apartment?
Yes. Yes, they will. I've had several people that live in condos, real tall buildings and so on. They will come to feeders there. And you can also have, if you have the little balcony thing, you can have a couple of potted plants and they will see that too. But yes, they will.
Right, and anyone in any situation can put out potted plants, even if all you have is an apartment balcony, and you can still attract hummingbirds and other birds.
Right. And it doesn't have to be an exotic plant. Hummingbirds love the trumpet-shaped flowers. You know, that kind of cuts down on competition because nothing else can get up in there to get where the nectar is. So the little hummingbird can hover there. They'll stick their little beak up in there, and then the tongue extends about as far as the beak. It acts as a sponge, so it soaks up the nectar, pulls that back into its little head, and kind of, this is very simplified, like squeezes it out and swallows, and they do this to the tune of 12 to 15 times a second. 12 to 15 times a second.
Hummingbirds don't do anything slow.
Yeah, no, they don't. It's another reason you don't want the nectar to be too thick.
Yeah, I have crossvine that I planted on my oak tree, and it's gone all the way up where I can't even see it flowering, but my wife, they saw a hummingbird feeding up on those flowers.
Yes, they love stuff like that.
High elevation.
Yes.
So
hummingbirds are actually one of our 4 primary pollinators. There are at least 167 plants in the United States that depend entirely on hummingbirds for pollination. Down in South America, where most of the hummingbirds live, there may be between 2,000 and 3,000 plants that depend entirely on hummingbirds to pollinate.
on Audubon, Arkansas's website, I have a recording of a talk that I've given that is about the pollination life of birds and talks about the difference between hummingbirds and other birds and the plants that they rely on them all over the world. So
yes.
that
And,
one.
hummingbirds are, excuse me, go ahead.
Oh, let's move on to another 4 questions that are coming
Okay.
in here. So someone heard that proportionally speaking, hummingbirds have the largest brains of all wild birds. They want to know if that's true.
The,
Hummingbirds
the lo-
are so smart. Can they be trained and reinforced with a nectar reward?
I suppose they could, but it's not the size of the brain, but it is the capacity of the brain. If a hummingbird has ever been to your house and you had good nectar, they know where you live. Even if they're doing their migratory path, their flight, they will come back by their, they can determine, they can detect, they know where their favorite flowers are. They know where their favorite people are. And some people think that they can actually recognize their people, which, the person that takes the feeder out and feeds them, they may be able to recognize that person. We don't. Sure.
Crows certainly can recognize individual people. So it's possible that hummingbirds can, or at least they recognize the behavior, the motion of someone coming out and changing feeders up. So when should a person first put their feeders out for the returning hummingbirds?
Okay, hummingbirds, and we keep saying returning.
In Arkansas.
Remember, hummingbirds overwinter. Our hummingbird, the ruby-throated hummingbird, overwinters in central Mexico. They normally fly back across the Gulf, which is an 18 to 20 hour flight nonstop, and there's nowhere to feed. But they usually make that flight and they usually land along the coast around the end of February. So here in Stuttgart, we typically get our first hummingbirds around April the 1st. But Little Rock, y'all get them before we do. There are some hummingbird migration maps. You can just Google, in the spring, Google hummingbird migration map, and it will bring up, when a person sees their first hummingbird of the season, they can get on that website. They give their location and the date, and that information is placed on the map. So it's just like a wave. You can see as the hummingbirds make their way up, and they go all the way up into Canada. If you can imagine the state of Arkansas, think about your western border, draw a line from that western border all the way up into Canada. From that line to the East Coast, that is the breeding territory for the ruby-throated hummingbird. That's why we have so many of them. There are a few other species of hummingbirds that they're around, but they're not really a true breeding population. I don't know, they got lost. Who knows why they're here, but they're not normally here to breed, just the ruby throat.
So basically by the end of March in Arkansas, it's time to get your feeders out.
Definitely.
For the hummingbirds. And then when would you recommend taking them down in the fall?
You could take, if you're putting out a whole bunch of feeders, you might want to start taking them down, say the middle or the end of September, by the middle of September, unless you're still seeing a lot of birds. Now, a couple of years we could have gone, normally we did not schedule programs past the 1st of September because I couldn't count on how many birds I'd have. But we had a couple of years where we could have had bird programs all the way to the end of September. Now, I ask that you leave at least one feeder out, even as the weather gets colder. You may have a little bird that's coming from Canada making its way down, and it's late. I mean, is anybody else ever late to something anywhere? I speak of myself. So you may have a little hummingbird that comes along. They have had to double or triple their weight. They're going to put on fat layers so they can have energy enough to make it across the Gulf. So if they're coming from way up, even from Little Rock, if they're going from Little Rock down to the coast, you don't want them to have to use that stored energy. You want to have them have a feeder that they can get to so they won't have to use up their energy. they have just enough energy to make that flight across the Gulf. They aim for the Yucatan Peninsula because that's the furthest out in the Gulf. Then they work their way on into the inland. But they have just enough energy to get there. If they meet a strong headwind, they don't make it. They don't have enough energy and they will die. If they get a good tailwind, yeehaw, they get there quicker.
So before we move on to more about wintering hummingbirds, I got 2 more feeder related questions here.
Okay.
3 more, I guess. So back to the feeders. Is it better to have a feeder that has a perch for the hummingbird or not? Does it matter?
It doesn't seem to matter to the hummingbirds. You know, giving it a human characteristic, I'd rather have somewhere that I could land to eat myself. But it doesn't seem to matter that much to them. They'll go to either kind of feeder.
And someone has read that the feeders with the little slit as opposed to a hole can be dangerous.
No. The feeder with the little slit would be better for them. Their little tongues will fit down in there with no problem. The advantage to using the feeder with the slit, most other insects like bees and wasps, they cannot get in there to get to the nectar. The little hole, they can sometimes get into that hole, especially if you've had the feeder that has that little yellow flower thing on it and squirrels have popped that off for you. Your hole will be a little bit bigger and the bees and wasps will go to those holes. But they can't, but if you have newer feeders that have those little slits, that seems to be a deterrent to some of the other insects. They want to land there and get to the sugar water.
Is it too late to put out a hummingbird feeder right now?
Oh, no. Please do. Please do. What month is this? June. The hummingbirds have been on their nest. They should be having the fledglings come off pretty soon. So you're going to have Mama lays 2 eggs. And so like I've not been to the office since January, February, March. But I know we do have quite a few hummingbirds down there, but when the fledglings start coming off, that's going to kind of almost double your hummingbirds. She'll lay her 2 eggs the first round, and as soon as she takes care of those little ones, and once they leave the nest, she'll stay with them a couple of days or a few, maybe a week, and kind of show them around a little bit. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm through with you. I have told you, I've given you all the information. The rest of it is up here in your head. So you may leave my feeding territory, go find you somewhere else to eat. And she'll have her second brood. So technically she should have 4 fledglings per season. Hummingbirds have a very high mortality rate. Maybe 30% or more may not make it. So we lose a lot of them from predators. They run into buildings, windows. I guess they could run into a car. I don't know.
Get their bill stuck in unfortunate places like holes in homes and
yeah.
storm windows and all sorts of things.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a dried hummingbird that someone found in the corner of a warehouse.
Oh.
Yeah, it just got mummified, and poor little thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do hummingbirds need water? Should you put out water for them to drink or to bathe?
Oh, yes. I'm glad somebody asked that. Hummingbirds love water. You do good with the little bubblers. You do good with something that's like a little tiny waterfall or the little sprinkler system. They will fly back and forth through your yard sprinkler. They love to be clean and cooled off just like anybody else. And think about what they're eating. It's very sticky. If you don't believe nectar is sticky, pour a little dab on your floor and let it dry and then step in it. You're going to be stuck to the floor. So, you know, they don't always get all that nectar off of that little beak. And so they love to do that. I've even seen them like the little plastic waterfalls like Walmart has sometimes. They will go up to the waterfall and stick their little beak up in the water as it's falling. Then they back off and they shake and get water droplets everywhere, and then they do it again. So, they love to do that. If you have a real shallow bird bath, you can put fresh water in that. Be sure to leave some little rocks or something where they could land. Because remember, hummingbirds cannot walk. If they want to move, they've got to fly. But if they can land on a little rock, well, they can splash water on themselves. They can clean their little beaks off and on like that. And if you do use a little tiny bird bath, try to place it where they can safely get to a bush or a little tree very nearby. So as soon as they get through taking their bath, they can get over there and finish their preening, and they're not liable to something to snatch them up.
Someone asked if Oriole food, there's some pre-mixed Oriole food, if that is okay for hummingbirds.
I suppose if you didn't have any table sugar, you could use that. The sucrose in the table sugar is what is the type of sugar that they want. I'm not familiar with which type of sugar is in the Oriole. I've not looked at a label on that. If you
so make sure it's sucrose. And then, of course, hummingbirds and Orioles will feed off some of the same tubular flowers.
So it probably would be okay. But if you've got table sugar, I mean, who does not have table sugar? See, raise your hands if you don't have table sugar. be honest about it.
Someone wanted to know what to do about woodpeckers eating from the feeders. Do they scare off the hummingbirds?
Probably. The bad thing about woodpeckers, they're going to make the holes so big that anybody can get there. But now, flip side, the woodpeckers may be getting the little hummingbirds back, because hummingbirds can go to where a woodpecker has been pecking on the tree. If there's a little bit of sap still coming out, hummingbirds can go lick on that. So woodpeckers may be doing a payback.
Yeah, what's thought that that's an important source of food for hummingbirds. In the early in the season, before there's a lot of flowering plants around, that hummingbirds will visit sap wells drilled by sap suckers and get the sap from the tree or get the insects that are stuck in the sap.
Yes, because remember, they can.
Personal experience, I've seen, probably have a downy woodpecker come into my hummingbird feeder more often than I have a hummingbird coming to it. And woodpeckers have a long tongue, just like hummingbirds do. So there's not anything stopping them from getting that nectar through that little hole.
Yeah.
Maybe if you have the hummingbird feeder, it doesn't have a perch on it, maybe that will.
Yeah, that would take
her off.
Yeah, the woodpecker, because I imagine they're going to have to land. I don't think they could sit there and fly. So
let's just, before we end, just touch on the wintering hummingbird phenomenon. Okay.
It's rare that a ruby throat will stay in Arkansas during the wintertime. It has happened. We banded a little female one time, and Dan, I think you were there. That was because he was just off of JFK and in the middle of the snow. And those people had a real nice place for the little hummingbird to be eating and all. But typically, if we see a hummingbird in Arkansas in the wintertime, it's going to be the rufous hummingbird. It's a rusty colored hummingbird that normally breeds in Alaska. They come down the West Coast, swing across Mexico very quickly. And then over the past few years, they have been coming back up into Arkansas and actually overwintering here before they head on back up to Alaska. Of course, most of the time there's no nectar for them, but they can exist on insects alone. But if you have a feeder out, that's great. They will love you. They'll hang with you all the time. You can keep your feeder from freezing. For some hummingbirds, remember they don't fly, typically do not fly at night. So if you're afraid the feeder is going to freeze, you can bring it in after dark and get it back out right before daylight so the birds can have it there. Or you can fix it, the little green light thing that has a green stake on it that you put out in your yard to shine on Santa Claus. If you just put that about 12 inches away, about a 120-watt bulb, 12 inches away or so from your feeder, and that'll keep the sugar water from freezing. Because it's
Right. So
like
yeah.
salt water, it doesn't freeze as quickly as plain old water.
Sure. So a heat lamp or some kind of heating element to keep the feeder
Yeah.
from freezing is important.
Right.
And of course, hummingbirds are wintering here in small numbers. If you don't have a feeder out, you're never going to see one. If you keep your feeder out all winter long, there is still a tiny little chance will host a wintering hummingbird.
Yeah.
So it's up to you if you want to bother maintaining your feeder all winter long. I think generally I would say if you don't have a hummingbird coming by Thanksgiving, you probably don't have one.
Probably
around.
not going to, yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
you never know. And just hold for the record, I counted, in addition to the ruby-throat, there are 9 other species of hummingbirds that have been documented in Arkansas.
Right.
It's, of course, being the most common one, but we've had black-chin, calliope, annas, broad-tailed, broad-billed, and others. So, and the females can often be very difficult to tell apart, which is why it's important to call Tana if you have a hummingbird. So
and that would have to be done just strictly by those measurements, because even your the guidebooks on birds will tell you they're virtually impossible to tell the difference between, and you're going, oh, thank you for that information. Gee. That's why the measurements are so important, like that.
Right, and there's details in the tail feathers and other things that banders can look at to identify a bird that you can't always tell just by looking at it. Although in some cases, if you get a really good photo of the right parts of the bird, you can identify what species it is, but it's not always easy to tell. And we birders and ornithologists really like to have that record of those rare winter hummingbirds. So please, see something, say something, call Audubon, call Game and Fish, let us know that bird is there.
Yeah. Dan, there's one little thing that I wonder if people know. Hummingbirds have 900 to 1,000 feathers on their little bodies, which really is fewer feathers than most birds have anyway. But hummingbirds do not have feathers on their chest area. None. The reason for this, when mama is sitting on the nest, she wants to have that warm, direct skin contact with those little eggs so they'll hatch quicker. Remember, they do everything in fast forward. So she wants those little eggs to hatch real quickly. If she's got a beak that's like, for us, it would be a beak like maybe 3 feet long. And she cannot reach down and pull those feathers out. So God just didn't give her any feathers. It's fixed so that their feathers are fixed so it flips back over each other, and it looks like she has solid feathers on her chest area, but she does not. Nor the male does not either, although he doesn't have anything to do with raising and taking care of the babies. In fact, she will not let him be near the nest. She will run him off because he's so brightly colored, and he can have predators follow him into the nest. But he doesn't have any feathers there either. He doesn't sit on the nest. I guess so we can check his little fat layers maybe.
That doesn't make it easy to look for fat if they don't have any feathers there. You just blow and see their skin.
Right.
A comment from someone is that the Oriole nectar ratio is 6 to 1. So that is not good for hummingbirds.
That would not be.
And then if someone had a wintering hummingbird, how would they get a hold of you to get attention if you're available?
Normally you can call Potlatch Conservation Education Center. If you want to write down the phone number there, of course, I'm not there.
We'll provide that for everybody.
Okay.
Yeah. So one more question then is, do you know when classes might resume at Cook? And are the birds being fed if no one's working there?
Yes. My educator, Will Hafner, lives on site and does not have internet at the house. So it was logical that we leave him there, and he is operating out of the office. And then I'm operating out of my home here in Stuttgart. So there is someone there, and we're constantly buying sugar for them. He said they're there. So they are being taken care of, even though we don't have anybody, we have no programs going on right now. We have no visitation right now. On our conference call today that I just got off of, they're still telling us not to have any, not to plan any in-person meetings or presentations even through the end of July. So I don't know. They're developing the protocol as we go. All this is so new. And, our classroom only seats 36, and we could not have a capacity classroom size. So
Understandable.
we will put it, if we get to schedule any programs this year, we will have it on our website. We'll have it on the Game and Fish website. All the avenues that we can advertise with the Game and Fish, we will have the dates on there if we get to have it.
Well, thank you, Tana, so much for your time and expertise. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And in the meantime, we can't all get together and be educated by Tana in person, but I'm glad she's here today. And please keep feeding your hummingbirds. And
Definitely.
Remember, 1 part sugar to 4 parts water.
Look at your hand. That's your recipe.
So, all right, everyone, have a good evening. Enjoy the birds and stay tuned for more webinars from Audubon, Arkansas. Thank you.
Okay. Let me try something here.